Hi, I'm Wayne McCullough, and you're listening to My Career Profile on BTI Boxing Podcast Network.
Welcome back, fight fans, to another episode of Career Profiles. I'm your host, Sean Bastow, joined, as always, by Johnston Brown for another delve into the life and times of a brilliant fighter, a well-renowned fighter, a fighter that people need to hear about throughout boxing history. This fighter was selected by one of our long-time listeners, Seamus Laverty. Seamus, thank you so much as always for supporting us, and I know that this fighter is one of your absolute heroes. We're talking about Pocket Rocket Wayne McCullough, one of the great fighters of the 1990s, one of my favourite fighters. Going back and looking at his career for this episode, I realised how much I enjoyed watching him growing up as a child at the age of 9, 10, 11, getting into the sport. And Wayne McCullough's one of those fighters that he's brilliant. He's been in there with the absolute best of the best of his time. And this is what the episode is really going to reflect. And we're going to talk about his life and his times and his career, the ups, the downs, the aftermaths. I'm really looking forward to this one, Johnston.
Yes, same here. Wayne Pocket Rocket McCullough is one of my favourite fighters to watch of all time. The guy will easily fit in my top 50 best British fighters of all time, possibly even the top 40, to be honest with you. I mean, it was just an absolute joy to watch. It's great to be able to go through his career. I mean, if you know, when you get those little messages on social media when they ask you to build your perfect fighter, Wayne McCullough's cast iron jaw would be an absolute wanted on everyone's list, because he had a great jaw and a relentless style, an absolute joy to watch. The Americans loved to watch him. He had that great style, and that's just what made Wayne for me. He just missed that killer big punch, but other than that, what a tremendous fighter Wayne McCullough was.
He absolutely was a tremendous fighter, and I'm sure you guys, by the end of this episode, you're probably going to agree with us, and it'll probably make you go back and watch all these fights, because that is certainly what we was doing in preparation for this episode. But as always then, with the career profiles, it's all about taking you back to the beginning and setting a bit of context to the life and the times of particular fighters like Wayne McCullough. Now, Wayne was born in a terraced house on Percy Street on Shank Hill Road in Belfast, Northern Ireland, on July the 7th, 1970. And he was born into a family of 6, with 2 older brothers, Noel and Alan, 2 older sisters, Joan and April, and 2 younger sisters, Christina and Anne. Now, the area he was born into was troublesome, to say the least. At one end of Percy Street was the Protestant Shank Hill Road, and at the other was the Catholic Falls Road. Now, when the Troubles started in 1969, a wall was erected as a security barrier to separate the two communities, commonly known as the Peace Wall. Now, according to journalist Patrick Bishop and Eamon Malley, both communities were in the grip of mounting paranoia about the other's intentions. The Catholics were convinced that they were about to become victims of a Protestant pogrom. Protestants that they were on the eve of an IRA insurrection. The family moved out of the city of Belfast for a couple of years before returning to the top of Shankill Road in their Highfield estate. Now, Wayne grew up at the peak of the Troubles during the 1970s and 80s, and he remembers, in his words, British soldiers would patrol the streets carrying rifles, and to me, this was normal. Growing up on the Shankill area was dangerous, and bombs going off was a regular occurrence. Wayne witnessed shootings and saw his friends getting arrested. To keep himself out of trouble, he would attend the local community centre in Highfield. Sometimes trouble would find him, and he said, "I remember a bomb going off there in broad daylight. It was only about 200 metres from where we lived, and most of the windows in the houses around the estate were blown out. My dad and his friend were the first people on the scene, and of course all the kids followed them to see what had happened. The story went that there was a guy inside making a bomb, and it went off prematurely and blew him to pieces. Half of the community centre was gone too. The guy's head was actually still stuck to the ceiling when I went in, and then my friends and I were told to get out."
Wow. I know myself only too well from my dad's side of the family, who was Northern Irish, and they lived through those troubles. I've heard some stories that are a lot like what Wayne describes there, and everyone in his household smoked, so it wouldn't take long for his small terraced house to get filled up with secondhand smoke. And Wayne was always aware of the dangers of obviously breathing in smoke at such a young age, which is, good little head on his shoulders. And he would take himself away and sit outside the front door while having a moment to reflect. And he recalled, I would just do a lot of thinking. I'd always loved Belfast, but I'd think to myself that there had to be something better out there for me. Belfast is a well-known fighting city, as we know, but another sport that the Irish love was football. And Wayne actually used to play in goal when he was younger. And he began attending the Spring Hill Primary School on the Ballygo-Martin Road. Now, he was a youthful with his hands, so he dreamed of being like a goalkeeper like Ray Clements and Pat Jennings. And by the sounds of things, he wasn't half bad, but his height would eventually curb that dream. He also loved to play rugby, and although small in frame, he was natural running with the ball. While in school, he loved mathematics and English, and by the age of 10, he actually considered himself to be a bit of a teddy boy. He loved to go out to the disco and dance. That Christmas, he dreamed of owning a pair of blue suede shoes to go with his drain pipe trousers. But with money that was a bit tight in the household, he wasn't sure if he'd get his most prized present. But sure enough, his mum and dad, they come up trumps. And he funny remembers, imagine my delight when I woke up on Christmas morning and the shoes were there waiting for me. I couldn't wait to get them on and go dancing. Probably why he's so good with his feet as well. Due to having two younger sisters, he found himself babysitting over the weekends rather than going out with his mates. He enjoyed riding his bike in the day, visiting McDonald's for a burger before heading off to his brother's to listen to the top 40 on the radio. He lived a simple life, but as he said, I didn't know anything different and saw no reason to complain. He built a close bond with his granddad, McCullough, who actually sadly passed away when he was just 13.
It was his brothers that got him into boxing at the age of 7, and he said, I remember walking across the West Circular Road in Belfast, heading to the Albert Foundry boxing gym with my two brothers, Noel and Alan. I had seen the trophies they had won, and I wanted one too. Now, he trained in the gym with amateurs and professionals. The one fighter he looked up to the most was David Lamour, a Commonwealth bronze and gold medalist and Olympic boxer for Ireland before turning pro in 1983. Now, Wayne would observe the other fighters while training in his early days and pick up tips, and he recalled watching Davey hit the bag and hit the pads and spar. And he said he may not have known it, but I learned a lot from him. When I was older, I sparred with him a few times, and he was very hard to hit. He was always teaching me new moves, and I took it all in. I respected him for making the time for me. Now, Wayne trained at the gym with his amateur coach, Harry Robinson. No matter the weather, rain, snow or sleet, he would be there training. It was an old and decrepit gym that was freezing in the winter and flooded in the rain and then roasting in the summer. But it never deterred his appetite to one day become a world champion. At the age of 8, he had his first amateur fight in Ballyclare, a town 13 miles from Belfast. Full of nervous energy and taking on a vastly more experienced kid, Wayne produced the goods and won by a second-round stoppage. Now, fighting in a time with no gum shields, no weigh-ins, no head guards, and only 8-ounce gloves, Wayne took to it like a duck to water. He was a natural who had plenty of fights, and he said, before I was 12 years old, I probably had participated in 100 fights.
Jesus. He learned a lot in his early days working with Harry, observing Davey and watching his hero, Barry McGuigan, on the television. McGuigan's exciting style impressed Wayne, but he found out quickly the power that boxing had in Northern Ireland while travelling around the country with Harry. He said boxing has no political boundaries. When you are in the arena, it doesn't matter who is in the ring with you. If you are a spectator, it doesn't matter who is fighting, Catholic or Protestant. You are there for the sport. It's a different story for some outside of the area, but inside, I've always found there are no dividing lines. Great quote there from Wayne, to be honest with you. He also learned that finding the right opponents was hard to come by. Obviously, the more successful he became, and then he realised that he had officially made a name for himself. By the age of 11, he won his first amateur tournament, the Northern Ireland Boys Clubs Championship. Wayne could have gone on to further education, but without much pressure from his mum or his dad and his family, he decided to go to Carrin Martin Secondary School, close to his home. He got involved in any sport going. He ran cross countries, played hockey, continued to play football, and even played bowls with his dad. During his time at school, he never got into any fights. His reputation as a boxer had earned him the respect, but he would stand up for some of the kids that got bullied. He never smoked, he never did drugs with his mates because he was always conscious of his fitness. He just loved to box, and that was what kept him on the straight and narrow. He has fond memories of being with his friends on the 11th night, which are the celebrations before the Protestant marches on July 12th. They would collect wood for the bonfires and camp out for weeks before the marches so nobody would steal their wood. Wayne left school after year 10, aged about 15, and went straight into the youth training program, or as some of us know, the YTP, and he began a course on becoming a carpenter. He got 27.5 quid and he loved it because he could now concentrate on his boxing.
Wayne remembers his routine during his YTP, and he said, before I set off for work in the mornings, I would go running, and every night when I came out of work at 5 o'clock, I would run home in my steel toe cap boots. It was about 3 miles. I got a snack and I went straight into the gym. My whole day was taken up with work and boxing, and that's what I wanted. He completed his course, signed on for a year, and then worked as the caretaker at St. Columba's, the church where he played bowls with his dad. He earned double his money for less hours and continued to train as much as possible. And he finished with a very successful amateur career, amassing a record of 319 wins and 11 defeats, with over 100 wins coming by way of knockout. Now, he believes that not all of his defeats were justified, and he said, when I was competing in the County Antrim Championships, the decisions went against me every year. So I'd say I probably only lost 5 or 6. I used to beat up my opponents really badly, but I would still lose the decision. Maybe they went against me because I was one of the very few Protestants in a Catholic-dominated sport. Now, none of that biased judging bothered him. It just made him more determined. He finally won the County Antrim and then the Ulster Championships at 14, but was given a wake-up call the following year when he got stopped in the Gaelic Games. To gain more experience, Wayne was approached to spar with a WBA flyweight champion, Fidel Bassa. Now, this was during the time that the Colombian had 2 epic title fights in 1987 and 1988 against Dave McCauley at the King's Hall in Belfast. Wayne remembers throwing about 1,000 punches, and he said it was an honour to be sparring with a world champion. He taught me a lot of moves, and we worked well together. He was asked to stay and continue sparring with the champ, but he had his own business to attend to in the Gaelic Games.
Great experience. I'll tell you what, that the Bassa and the Dave McCauley fights may even be a little legendary night for us, Sean. I think we should take note of that. This time, though, in the Gaelic Games, he brought back the gold medal in 1987. He actually met his hero, Barry McGuigan, while representing young Ireland against young England, and was awarded the best fighter of the night. He recalls Barry actually telling him, he was obviously, you can imagine, he must have been absolutely starstruck, and Barry McGuigan told him that I would need to slow down a little or I wouldn't last. But that's the way I fought. And like everyone else, Barry later found out that I could keep going. And he sure could. He was relentless. Not only was Wayne a relentless fighter, but his career was moving in the same pace as he did in the ring. And at the age of 17, he won the Ulster and the Irish seniors and received the best boxer of the tournament in both championships. McGuigan's promoter, Barney Eastwood, then allowed him to train at the Castle Street gym for free while his brother, Alan, who was another boxer, continued in his professional career. He gained great experience sparring with more professional fighters in Davey McCauley and Paul Hodkinson. Fighting at light flyweight, Wayne defeated 26-year-old PJ O'Hallahan in the Ulster Seniors and stopped him again in the Irish Amateur Boxing Association, the IABA, in what he thought was actually a box-off for the 1988 Olympic Games. Then at the National Stadium in Dublin, he showed his class, stopping Cuban, and we know how tough the Cubans are at an amateur level, Daniel La Rosa, who actually had a record of 99-5, and he stopped him in the second round. Those performances were cemented further with a great win over another legendary fighter, in a Turo Gatti when Ireland fought Canada. Wayne recalls that his corner threw in the towel in the first round after I'd given him 2 standing counts. Thinking his place on the plane was sealed after stopping 12 inside the distance that year alone, the Irish board actually decided to enter him into the European Junior Championships instead. Wayne, of course, was absolutely gutted. He couldn't believe their decision, but his trainer, Harry, well, he pulled some strings, and he remembers the joyous moment when Harry walked into the gym on Shankill Road, and this is what Wayne said. By the expression on his face, I knew he had good news. We're going to the Olympics, he said. I couldn't believe it. I was so happy. I was literally jumping for joy.
Now, as with any young man when growing up, your body changes, so making weight for Wayne became a struggle. In his autobiography, Pocket Rocket Don't Quit, he made a surprising admission on how he used to cut weight, and he said, on occasions, I'd make myself sick to get rid of the food I'd just eaten. I thought I had to do it to keep my weight down. It wasn't the smartest thing to do, but at the time, I felt it was the only way. I didn't have an eating disorder as such, but looking back, I'm sure it could have led to that.
Well, I think an eating disorder is like a lot of people can get it, but you're cutting weight all the time. You know, you're scared to put an ounce on. So that was a small part of my life, but I think people should know about it because a lot of people go through it. And say fighters in the gym it was a normal thing, more or less. I knew it wasn't normal, so he had to stop.
He kept that a secret with him for years, until he finally confronted his disorder to his girlfriend Cheryl in 1994. Wayne fitted in well with the rest of the Irish Olympic team, all of which were far more experienced than the 18-year-old. One of the team members was impressed with the country's young protege, and Wayne recalls, it was Kieran, as in Kieran Joyce, who gave me my ring nickname, and he said I was small enough to fit into his pocket and that I threw punches like a rocket. The Pocket Rocket was born. It has stuck with me ever since, so much so that I legally became Wayne Pocket Rocket McCullough in 2004. The coaches that joined them in career were Mickey Hawkins and the man that Wayne said treated him like a father while at the Olympics, Albie Murphy. Now, before the opening ceremony, Pat McCrory, president of the Ulster Boxing Council, approached Wayne and asked if he would carry the Irish flag at the opening ceremony because he was the youngest member on the team. Where most athletes would have considered this as a great honour, McCullough had to think cautiously before making his decision, and he said, I thought about it for a while, but what choice did I have? I don't think I should have ever been asked. If I had said no, then I would have been dubbed a hypocrite for fighting for Ireland. If I had said yes, I knew I would have been criticised. I knew I would have been criticised as a Protestant from the Shankill Road for carrying the Irish flag. After some consideration, I told him I would carry the flag for sport. I wouldn't do it for politics because I'm a sportsman, not a politician.
Well, carrying the flag it's one honour to every person every 4 years from the team, whatever team you're on. So I was fighting for Ireland, representing Ireland. They asked me to carry the flag because I was the youngest member of the team, and I said yes. I didn't think about the backlash because I know where I came from, but there were rumblings about there was windows put through and stuff like that. But when I went back, they had a celebration, they had a party, and there was no ill feeling towards me. So it was an honour to do it, and I'll never regret it.
Well, great head on his shoulders, such a great moment for him, obviously. Absolutely amazing moment. He must, he even says it is one of the greatest moments of his whole career. So amazing story there. But at the Seoul Olympic Games, well, Wayne got a first round bye before actually defeating a guy called Fred Mutuwata of Uganda on points. He's a name that will pop up again at some point. In the next round, he lost to the Canadian and the Commonwealth champion, Scotty Olsen. That was it. That was the end. McCullough, who was a bit of a slow starter, explains how that fight went in his book. He said he gave me 2 standing counts after hurting me to the body. I didn't know how to block those shots at the time. I came back and won the last round. After not winning an Olympic medal at the Seoul Games or the Seoul Olympics, he wanted to turn professional, but it was Harry that discouraged him. You're young. You haven't fully developed yet. Wait until you're a grown man. And credit to Wayne. he took on that advice reluctantly, but he did take it on. And, sometimes we do these career profiles, you hear fighters get this advice and they just don't take it on. But his trainer was right. Wayne decided to participate in the multinational tournament featuring England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland at the Ballysillan Leisure Centre in Belfast. A win would almost guarantee him a place in the 1990 Commonwealth Games in Auckland, New Zealand. He took on a southpaw called Johnny Armour and beat the Englishman on points after deciding to box his way to victory. 2 months before the Games, there was an international in Prague against the Czechs. Feeling that he had won an easy decision against this guy who fought in Czechoslovakia, the judges actually went against him and he was robbed. And by the sounds of it, what rubbed more salt in the wounds was the fact that the Irish judge actually agreed with the Czech judge, and it was the Englishman who felt Wayne had won. I think he just assumed, like most of us would have thought, the Irishman would have gone with him and the Czech would have gone with him. That was just, the politics in boxing. It didn't matter because his Commonwealth place was cemented, and he did pick up a ligament injury to his shoulder as well. 2 weeks later, he was back in training and getting ready for the Commonwealths. Representing Northern Ireland at flyweight in the Auckland Commonwealth Games, Wayne defeated Benjamin Wangata of Tanzania and then the Kenyan Maurice Mina, both on points, setting up a final against a guy called Shula Bushangu from a guy that was from Zimbabwe. Harry Carpenter was actually commentating at ringside as well during this, and he said, this is Wayne saying what Harry said, and what Harry said was that he was a model to all British boxers who fight in these championships, and he advised you must train hard and have stamina, and he was so right.
Now, with less than 30 seconds to go in the gold medal match, Wayne remembers that he hit Shabangu with a left hook that sent him straight to the canvas, and he said, "I knew I had secured the win and a gold medal for myself and Northern Ireland."
Well, you win the gold, you play the anthem, and I was waiting for the anthem to be played, and all of a sudden somebody stood up and sang, and it was, let's say, Bob Gibson, one of the officials. He was actually one of the officials in New Zealand. So when he got up and sang Danny Boy, then the whole arena sang Danny Boy, and it was emotional. It was our first gold medal in boxing at the games in '78, so it was emotional time, and it was for somebody to stand up and sing it was great, because I say the machine broke down, something had to happen, and everybody knows Danny Boy, so it was sung by the whole people. Yes, Margaret Thatcher was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and Northern Ireland being part of the United Kingdom, I was invited over. There was some of the English and Scottish and Welsh athletes were invited too, like medalists. I was the only gold medalist from Northern Ireland, so I was invited over. Walked into 10 Downing Street, shook her hand and she said, "Hello, Wayne," and she was nice to me. We had like a tea and sandwiches and stuff like that. I remember flying over that day and flying back. I think it was British Midland sponsored flights for me and my coach. So I flew over and back on the same day, but I got to walk into 10 Downing Street and meet Margaret Thatcher, so I think it's a little bit of history there.
To put the cherry on the cake of an excellent Commonwealth Games, Wayne carried the Northern Ireland flag for the closing ceremony. Wayne received many letters of congratulations, and many were from girls, and he replied to one, Cheryl Rennie, who later became his wife. Now, even with his hero status, Wayne found himself on the dole and with no money coming in. The offers for a professional contract were now looking very lucrative, but then the Irish Amateur Boxing Association presented him with an offer of becoming Ireland's first ever paid amateur boxer. £250 a month in cash, and the same amount added to an account that he could claim in a lump sum after the Olympics. He accepted the amateur offer and began to prepare for Barcelona in 1992. Wayne was very close with his mum, but she never watched his fights in the early days because she was afraid he would get hurt. And his dad came to some of his fights, but he lacked support in that side of his life. And he said, "I felt as if I had very little emotional or financial support in the early days. My mum and dad didn't encourage me. I wasn't praised when I won fights, but I kept going anyway. I did it for me, no one else." It wasn't until I won my Commonwealth Games gold medal that my parents became involved in my career. Now a full-time amateur, Wayne travelled to America and beat the highly ranked flyweight Tim Austin in his own backyard. In the summer of 1990, Wayne and his fellow Irishman Michael Curroff were picked to represent a European select elite team against a North American team in Salt Lake City, Utah. Once again, Wayne was matched with Austin, and once again, he took a decision, although the team lost 11-2.
So by the winter of 1990, Wayne moved up to bantamweight. He actually competed in the World Cup Championships in Bombay, India. Wayne won his first round against Indian Manjo Pingle, the quarterfinals against a Korean guy called DK Park, but lost the semi to the world champion, Serafim Todorov of Bulgaria. Now, he wasn't guaranteed a bronze back in these days where, you know, sometimes you have the semi-finals, and if you lose your semi-final, you're guaranteed a bronze. This time he had to actually fight in a bronze medal match. He had to fight Fred Matuita, the guy he had fought in the Olympics before, and he won a decision to not only collect his bronze medal, but he was actually also got himself a nice check of 1,500 quid as well, which would have gone down nicely as an amateur. Now ranked number 3 in the world at bantamweight, Wayne set his sights on becoming the 1991 Ulster Senior Bantamweight champion, but he had to get past the hard-hitting Johnson Todd. In front of a packed Ulster Hall, Wayne showed his slick boxing skills, but also showed his power, giving Johnson a standing 8 count and putting him down on his way to a comfortable points win. The BBC commentator at ringside was Jim Neely, and he said that he had shown he was the best at the light flyweight and the flyweight, and proved beyond all reasonable doubt that the best fighter at bantamweight. He then praised him on a remarkable amateur career. Even Wayne himself knew he had put a show on that night, saying, "In my opinion, this was by far my best amateur fight." By the sounds of it, I mean, it sounds like he was absolutely on fire. After missing out on that European Championships due to chickenpox, Wayne had to do well in an Olympic qualifier tournament in Sydney, Australia. But after winning his first 2 fights, he lost a very, very controversial decision again against the world champion from Cuba, Enrique Caron. He was absolutely disgusted. He said himself, he said, "To this day, I think there are too many politics in amateur boxing," and he's absolutely right. To get back into contention, he had to win the Ulster Seniors to end 1991, and then the Irish Seniors against Joe Lawler. He won both and was back on the plane to Germany in another Olympic qualifying tournament. But this time he actually needed to only win 2 fights, which he did. But instead of dropping out, like most people advised him to do, you know, you've won your fights, you're guaranteed your Olympic place, just drop out just in case you get injured. But no, he didn't want to. He carried on. He wanted that gold medal. And it wasn't easy. He fought a German in Germany, and he was losing 8-3 going into that third round, the third and final round. He threw absolutely everything at the German, Dieter Berg, but only managed to draw level on points with seconds to spare. Wayne threw a barrage of punches, and he recalls, "From that 10-punch combination, I managed to score 1 point. But that 1 point secured him a 9-8 win."
There's always politics in amateur boxing, bad decisions, and they never reverse. But that fight was, I fought 4 fights, 4 days. I had to win 2 to be guaranteed a place, but it was a tournament too. So I remember one of our officials said, "Oh, we just pulled out after 2 fights." I'm like, "What? I'm going to win a competition?" And big Nicholas Cruz Hernandez, our coach, yeah, he's all for it. I remember fighting him in the final. I was more or less beating the crap out of him. Tall southpaw, former European champion. And he'd already qualified for the Olympics too, but I was beating the crap out of him, and we could see the scores outside on the screen, and I just kept hitting him, going back to the corner after the first round, second round, and Nicholas is like, don't worry about it. And I was down going into the last round, and I'm thinking, I'm beating the crap out of this guy, I'm not getting the decision. So I remember walking out, and then within about 10 seconds to go, I looked up, and it was 8-8, and I looked up and just, oh no, they're going to rob me. I walked forward and threw a combination of probably 20 punches. Looked around, I'd won 9-8, and I even the German crowd were actually yelling for me, and there was a Cuban team over for another tournament, and they were all cheering for me. So at least the German people realised that I was winning and their guy wasn't, and they cheered me on. So it was a great experience. And I say the next step was the Olympics. So technically it was 4 fights won there. Then you go to the Olympics, you had 5 fights. Technically 9 fights you had for that one medal, because I didn't get anything. I never got a trophy or anything when I won it.
Preparations for the Olympic team started on June the 23rd in Cottbus, Germany. But 1 week later, the dreadful living conditions forced Wayne to return home early. Unofficially, he was kicked off the team for breaking ties with the team, but the following day, an IABA member told him that it was a sore rib that forced him home. He was back on the team again, and their final preparations ended in Drogheda in Southern Ireland. Wayne was drawn in the first round at the Barcelona Olympics against his long-standing rival Fred Mutueta, and he beat him a third time, 28-7 on the computer score. Absolutely dominating performance. The next up for him was the Iranian Ahmed Aboud, and he almost stopped him in the first round after the referee issued a standing 8 count. Now, while looking for the stoppage win, Wayne took an elbow to his bicep after landing a left hook to the body. And he went on to win the fight 10-2 on the computer score, but his bicep was in excruciating pain afterwards. Following physio treatment, he was ready to continue. Bantamweight Commonwealth gold medalist Mohamed Sabo of Nigeria was the quarter-final opponent. Now, this was the highest scoring fight in Barcelona, and Wayne came out on top 31-13 to guarantee him a certain bronze medal after picking up an outstanding 15 points in the very last round. He had accomplished his aim of medaling at the Olympics, so from this point, anything else would be a bonus. The North Korean Gwang-Sik Lee was the next opponent in the semis. He had just defeated the world champion from Bulgaria, Seferim Todorov, in the quarter-finals. Wayne admits that Lee was the hardest puncher that he ever fought in the amateurs. Now, just ahead, after 2 rounds, and with a broken cheekbone, Wayne showed true grit to come on strong in the third. The final computer score was 21-16, and Wayne would now compete in the gold medal match against the slick Cuban southpaw, Joel Casamayor.
They didn't tell his team that his cheek was broken because they would have pulled him out. Instead, he told his girlfriend, Cheryl, at the time his girlfriend, just to get it off his chest. The decision to fight was a brave one, and his chances were reduced dramatically with his busted cheekbone. Although Wayne felt like the fight was even going into the first round, he was actually 6-1 down. He was shocked, and he tried to push Casamayor back in the second. But Wayne was issued a standing 8 count. So I think it was like a sneaky shot that he caught him as he tried to sort of put him under pressure. Clearly in discomfort from his injuries, he said, "I had blood coming out the corner of my left eye, but I wasn't cut. The blood is coming out of my eye socket as a result of the damage that had been done to my cheek." I mean, the pain he must have been in, it's incredible. Wayne fought on to hear that final bell, and although he actually lost that final match 14-8, he was still a silver medalist. Both fighters had to wait in their changing rooms after the fight so they could actually complete a drugs test, which meant that he was unable to watch his friend Michael Carafe win his gold medal. He had to actually watch from the dressing room. Together, they had won the first silver at bantamweight since 1952 and their first ever gold, all on the same day. As they say, just like the buses. A few weeks after Wayne returned to Belfast, he went to hospital to get a second opinion on his cheek. And the first opinion was a Spanish doctor, and they just sort of said, "No, you're all right," kind of thing. I think it was too swollen. And this is what they discovered, that, in his own words, my cheekbone had been cracked in 3 places, and the nerve that runs from my eye down to the left-hand side of my face to the top lip had been ripped apart. I mean, how he managed to fight that final, I will never know. When Wayne arrived in Dublin Airport during the middle of the night, there were actually thousands of fans there to greet him, and Carafe as well, obviously, and offer their congratulations. They rode on an open-top bus through the city and were invited to numerous events. They were given awards by Dublin's mayor, at the Mansion House and the Ireland and the Latvia football match as well. They were giving awards there too. Wayne spent most of his time over in Dublin, Wexford and Drogheda for the next 6 months, and he made several appearances while waiting for his cheekbone to heal.
When he arrived in Belfast, another open-top bus drove down the Shankill Road to the Plaza Hotel in the Belfast city. He attended a function in honour of him and was given a gold watch, but while in the City Hall without Michael Carruth, he was informed that there had been some hesitancy from the Boxing Council to celebrate his victory, and Wayne says, in his own words, "Their alleged reason was that I had fought for Ireland. I was happy to fight for Ireland, but I had no choice, since boxing is an all-Ireland sport. I walked up to the Lord Mayor and I told him I wasn't impressed. In fact, I was disgusted. I fought for sport, not politics." With his cheekbone finally healing, he missed out on the offer of going to Buckingham Palace because he and Cheryl went on their holidays in Greece and decided that it was now time to turn over to the professional ranks. Now, he went on the dole while waiting to claim back his payment from the IABA for remaining amateur and sticking to his end of the bargain. Wayne said, "It was time to move on. I was sick of the amateur game. I wanted to be a professional boxer since I was 15. My mind was made up. I was turning pro." Now, you would have thought that the offer of a professional contract as an Olympic medalist would have been quite substantial, but they're anything but substantial. Most of the money involved included Wayne needing to work as well as train to make ends meet. In the end, Wayne remembers another Irish fighting legend reaching out, and he said, "I got a phone call from Barry McGuigan and he talked to me about Matt Tinley, an American TV executive with Prime International who was interested in signing me. Tinley was from Denver and a novice manager, but he had money behind him. He told Wayne at their meeting, arranged by his trainer Harry, that U2's Bono advised him to be a boxing manager. During this meeting, Wayne was offered a 2-year contract worth a high 5-figure sum. He was guaranteed a minimum of 7 fights in his first year and 8 in the second, along with the accommodation and a car in the United States. But nothing was signed on that day."
So all the correspondence was actually done by a fax machine back then. If some of the younger listeners probably might not know what a fax machine was, but that was the way it was done. And it was done between Wayne's trainer, Harry, their lawyers, and Matt Tinley. But all documentation was always shown to Wayne while he thought about his decision, whether he was going to go with Matt or not. And Wayne recalls the moment he turned professional in his book, and he said, "It was on the 9th of February, 1993. Harry and I met in his room at the 5-star Culloden Hotel close to Holywood on the outskirts of Belfast. He had flown back from the States, and with my lawyers present behind closed doors, I signed a contract into a professional. That night, I wrote in my training diary, aim world champion." After making the official announcement in press conferences, Wayne and Cheryl had 2 weeks to pack up and head to Baltimore, Maryland at first, where their trainer was going to be Yanks Morton, Sugar Ray Leonard's former trainer. Now, with his first pro fight actually scheduled for February 23rd, 1993 in Los Angeles, Wayne trained mostly in Belfast until their visas arrived. Now, they did have a very last-minute delivery. It was literally the guy apparently had come out at night in his slippers to sort of out his visa, but they made it in the 10th hour, and they also made it on a 10-hour flight and arrived in Los Angeles. There was also a late replacement in his trainer, and this is what Wayne recalls. He said, "Matt told me I wouldn't be training with Yanks Morton after all. Instead, Eddie Futch was going to train me. He was 82 years old at the time and working with Mike, the body snatcher McCallum, and Riddick Bowe." Wayne wanted to begin his career at super-bantamweight, but it was actually decided for him to start at bantamweight first. The contract also stipulated that Wayne would fight on cards that would give him exposure. So he fought on televised title events pretty much early stages. Eddie Futch was not in the corner for his first fight against Mexican Alfonso Zamora, and it was on a Dan Goosen promoted card, and on the undercard of Rafael Ruiz against Robert Rivero. McCullough, well, he impressed, and he was actually wearing green shorts with a 4-leaf clover that was stitched in He wasn't quite happy with it. The colours, it wasn't his choice. It was actually Matt Tinley that wanted to make him wear these green shorts. He didn't really want these politics involved. He agreed to wear them for this fight, one fight only, and he stopped Zamora in the fourth and final round to make a good start, a very good start to his professional career.
Now, he earned $5,000 plus another $1,000 for helping sell out the Reseda Country Club with his already quite large Irish following. Since the change in trainer, there was now a change in location. Wayne and Cheryl stayed in Las Vegas, near the Top Rank gym. Eddie Futch had already planned out Wayne's training regime, which was different to his normal one, with later sessions and nighttime running. Thel Torrance was Eddie's assistant, and together they worked on Wayne's combinations, with Thel on the pads and Eddie instructing the combos. Hedgeman Lewis, former welterweight world champion, and Freddie Roach were also part of the training team before Roach started his own gym in LA. Wayne sparred with world champions to test his resolve and development and held his own every time. The next month, Wayne was in New York City at the Paramount Theatre against the Golden Gloves winner in Sergio Ramirez, who was making his debut. McCullough stopped Ramirez in the third after putting him down twice. 1 week later, it was back at the Country Club in LA, but the fight was in danger of being dropped following the withdrawal of Wayne's opponent. The only possible replacement was another Golden Glove champion in Oscar Zamora, whose opponent also dropped out, but he was almost a stone heavier than Wayne McCullough. They decided to make the fight, and Wayne actually won a 4-round decision. The fight was straightforward, the weight never mattered in the end, but there was a breakdown in communication due to the difference in their accents. McCullough complained between rounds about his left hand, an injury he had picked up in his last fight, but Tell kept telling him to use it. After the fight was done and Wayne's gloves come off, his hand was swollen, and he remembers the moment that Tell finally noticed, and he said, "That's what you were trying to tell me after the first round." We laughed about it. Even though my hand was in a bucket of ice and I was in pain, I had practically fought and won the fight with one hand.
Great stuff. Love that. Complete breakdown there between the two of them. And after a 3-week rest, obviously, and a visit to the doctor, Wayne was back in the ring against Oscar Lopez in Boston, Massachusetts for his first 6-rounder. Barry McGuigan actually trained him for this fight while Eddie was working with Riddick Bowe. Not that it made any difference. Lopez refused to come out for the 5th after he sustained a cut. After that victory, Wayne picked up some good experience working with Bowe, Eddie, and Tell in a secluded area of Virginia. His 4th professional fight was against Manuel Ramirez in Denver on May 4th, 1993, 3 days before Wayne and Cheryl were to be wed in Las Vegas. Thankfully, the fight was actually stopped in the 5th of a scheduled 6, and they were married without Hibbs sustaining any face marks. I think that was what they were a bit worried about. They returned from their honeymoon in Hawaii, where Wayne had continued to train twice a week, something he always did. He always stood by that. Twice a week training he was always, throughout all of his career. And he was more than ready for his 6th pro fight in Philadelphia against a guy called Louis Roziero. It was plain sailing, stopping the Puerto Rican in the 6th. On June 18, 1993, he made a return to Belfast for his first fight on home soil, accompanied with Eddie and Tell. He fought the reigning Irish champion, a guy called Con McCullum, at the Maysfield Leisure Centre. And the Irish loved to see Eddie and Tell. Apparently, the Irish fans were all over him to say hello. And it was his first 10-rounder as well, against a good little fighter. And Wayne recalled that he was strong, but as in most of my fights, I was throwing more punches at him. I was giving him angles, hitting him with shots to the head and the body, and I knew Eddie's training had already helped me. And I'll tell you what, that is the one thing, the way he switched his angle sometimes, I mean, it's very impressive. It was a very impressive display as well, and a return. The referee, Barney Wilson, actually stopped the fight in the 3rd, making it 7 wins and 6 inside the distance. After finishing the summer in Belfast, Wayne told Matt that he didn't want to return to Belfast until the support had increased. This is what Wayne said. He said that actually the venue only sold out half of the venue's capacity of 2,000 for that fight, and he weren't interested in coming back until he got some bums on seats.
Now, on his return to the States, he headed to the Big Bear Gym in California and began training with Bowe. His following in Southern Ireland had not dwindled, so his next fight was on September the 24th against Buliem Belkiv at the Taligan National Basketball Arena in Dublin, which held a capacity of about 3,000 people, and it was packed to the rafters. With Montel Griffin on the undercard, Wayne McCullough seized on the electric atmosphere. After flooring the Algerian in the fourth, it didn't take the Pocket Rocket long to find the finish in the next round, and he remembered working his head and his body as I backed him into his own corner, then after a right uppercut that dropped him to his knees. The fight wasn't stopped by the referee. Belkiv got back to his feet, but it was eventually stopped after a barrage of punches closed the show. Wayne felt appreciated by the Dublin crowd, so asked for a return soon to show his appreciation. Before that wish was completed, it was back to the States. 3 days before his next scheduled bout in North Dakota, Matt got tickets for the Bo Holyfield rematch in Caesars Palace, the famous Fan Man fight. As Wayne says in his book, Only in Vegas, his next opponent was Andreas Gonzalez on the undercard of Virgil Hill's defence of his WBA light heavyweight title against Saul Montana. In his easiest professional fight, he knocked out his opponent in just 2 rounds with a devastating punch that Wayne explains, in the second round, I caught him with a right uppercut that lifted him off his feet and he fell flat on his face. It was fight over. Jerome Coffey was next on 30th of November, and he had gone 15 rounds with the former world champion Jeff Fenech. Jerome also trained at Top Rank in Vegas, so this was a bit of an inner gym grudge match. He was 35-10-1 with 19 KOs and was a featherweight, but they fought between those weights at 8 stone 10 pounds. Fighting on the undercard of a Roy Jones Jr. fight in front of his adoring fans at the Civic Center in Pensacola, Florida was a great moment for Wayne, and he reflected on this fight by saying, "It was an honour for me to be on his undercard."
For the first time, Wayne McCullough actually experienced pre-fight trash talk and would have clearly felt pressure going into this fight because of the in-house rivalry. But he never showed it. He stopped the American in 5 of the scheduled 10 when Coffey actually refused to come off his stool. The US network commentators again spoke highly of the new kid on the block. Sean O'Grady remarked, "This relentless attack is reminiscent of Rocky Marciano. Look at this aggression. Look at the inside punches, combination hooks. He's a bell-to-bell bomber." And Albert finished that statement by saying, "From Belfast." 11 months on from turning professional, Wayne McCullough's career was moving along nicely. So to begin the new year, his next fight was scheduled to take place on January 18, 1994 against the Puerto Rican Javier Medina, who was actually undefeated 9-0-1 in Omaha, Nebraska for the North American Boxing Federation, or as we know it, the NABF bantamweight title. Medina was looking to take McCullough into the uncharted waters, and that was a 12-round distance. It was there that he was hoping that the young Irishman would begin to tire. Wayne had only been 6 rounds so far in his career, but he was always strong, and he had unbelievable stamina and was out-punching all of his previous opponents. When the fight got into the 6th round, Wayne was in complete control. He's beating his man around the ring. He floored him in the 6th, but his valiant challenger actually got back to his feet, which was credit to him. He started the 7th, how he finished that 6th, all over Medina, and in the end, Wayne McCullough the 2nd knockdown. And he said a left hook combination to the body sent Medina to the canvas. The fight was actually allowed to continue by the referee, and the former heavyweight as well was John Stander, who was refereeing that fight. But a 20-punch rally forced him to stop the contest in the 7th round. Wayne McCullough was over the moon to win his first title or significant title at the age of just 23 years old. And he said, "I was overjoyed and jumped into Tell's arms. Just as well he caught me. I'd won the NABF title and I felt fantastic. The fans were going crazy and gave me a standing ovation. Medina never fought again." Eddie later said, "Had I not fought him, Medina could have gone on to become a world champion. That's how good he was." And that was how good of a win that was for Wayne McCullough.
Very significant win in his career, probably a significant win that people don't really consider. But you think about what that leads on to and the confidence it gives Wayne in his career, it makes you wonder, like, these early fights and how significant they were. And this was one of them against Medina. Now, Wayne was still suffering with hand problems when he damaged his hand in his fight in New York. A doctor said that an operation was needed to correct it, but the odds were 50-50 that he would be able to fight again. So, he stopped the surgery from happening. Dr. Sue was in Bo's camp, and he had worked on Wayne's hands before, trying to stretch his ligaments. The doctor was brought in again after the Medina victory to assist with his recuperation. Wayne said that he stretched my hand and gave me hot and cold water treatments. I couldn't punch for about 5 weeks after the Medina fight. 2 months on, and Wayne was scheduled to fight on March the 19th, 1994, outdoors at Millwall's football stadium in London. He was on the undercard of the WBO Heavyweight Championship of the World between Herbie Hyde and Michael Bent. The fight was televised on Prime International and on ESPN in the States, as well as on television here in the UK. His opponent was initially a boxer from Colombia, but he had to pull out at the last minute, so in stepped Mark Hargreaves, who was a fully fledged super featherweight. Eddie and Tell were a little worried at first because they never got to see him weigh in, not because they missed it, but because he hit the scales elsewhere. The fight, though, well, that was still allowed to go ahead. Hargreaves came out swinging in the first round, and Wayne felt like he had been training for him. He felt like it was all a bit of a fix to have him beat. His right hand once again caused serious problems, and he was in a lot of pain after the first round. It took until the third round for him to find his rhythm, and that was the round he finished the fight with a straight knockout victory. After the fight, he felt annoyed with the whole night, and he later wrote in his training diary about this, and he said, "I wanted to see him fall. I was frustrated because I was messed about all week. Another opponent wasn't allowed to fight. I think they were trying to get me beat."
So Wayne was actually given a cortisone injection to ease his pain in his right hand on May 18. But by June, he was ready to face what he called my hardest fight ever. The fight was the main event at the Taj Mahal in Atlantic City on June 17, 1994 against the former WBC bantamweight champion and #1 contender, Victor Rabanales, who was 37-12-2 from Mexico. Now, after a 3-week training camp at the Big Bear in California, Wayne McCullough was ready to defend the NABF title, and it was also a final eliminator for that WBC belt. The winner would go on to fight the Japanese WBC champion, Yasu Yakayushi. The English folk singer Brian Peters actually carried Wayne's belt, the NABF belt, into the ring while he walked to the sounds of U2. I still haven't found what I'm looking for. And he did literally, he loved U2. We'll speak about Bono in a little while, but he came out to U2 pretty much all the time. From the second round, McCullough knew he was in for a long night when he got caught with a vicious right uppercut. He actually nodded in appreciation back, but he came back with a right hand and a left hand combo that stopped Rabanales in his tracks as well. Now, McCullough was actually ahead on the scorecards when they headed into round 9, but the dangerous Mexican was always in the fight. It was at that moment that the challenger feinted a punch to the body and actually looped it up to his head, and it landed flush. It's a great disguised punch. And Wayne described what that punch felt like. And this is what he said. He said, for what seemed like 5 seconds, it was probably more like a thousandth of a second. I thought I was actually sitting on the sofa watching TV in my hotel room with Cheryl. I imagine it's what being out on your feet must feel like. But my legs stay strong. To this day, no other fighter has ever hurt me like that. When I was coming around again, everything was black and white and flashing lights. My vision was fuzzy. I couldn't see straight. I saw 3 Rabanaleses, and I didn't know what to do. So I hit the one in the middle. Somehow we survived the round without hitting the canvas, demonstrating, as we said at the top of the show, how much of a great chin he had.
Now, Eddie's advice was to box his way to victory in the last 3 rounds because he was ahead on the cards. And that's exactly what he did. He showed great recovery powers and then great boxing skills. The fight went the full 12 rounds and all 3 judges gave the fight to Wayne McCullough by unanimous decision 117-110, 116-110 and 115-113 to the delight of the Irish faithful. The next day, Ireland defeated Italy 1-0 in the 1994 World Cup in the USA. After a 3-month break from that gruelling battle, Wayne blew out the cobwebs with a 3rd-round knockout win over Mexican Andreas Cazares in his adopted home of Las Vegas. After the success of his first trip to Dublin, Matt Tinley got Wayne another fight, but this time at a bigger venue, the Point Theatre, on November the 12th. His opponent was the Spaniard Fabrice Benichou, who resided in France, a former IBF super-bantamweight champion, and had been trained by Eddie, so he was confident about Wayne winning the fight. Just before the fight, Matt informed Wayne that his earnings for the fight had been cut by £80,000. He was told that he would only get £20,000 for the fight. He was pissed off, obviously, about that, but to keep the fans happy, he fought on. Once again, Wayne was taking the distance against another tricky opponent, but only the 10-round distance because the NABF strap was not on the line. Wayne was cheered on by the 7,000 fans in attendance, and he comprehensively won 100-91, and is convinced that he threw more than 1,000 punches in that fight. His next fight was supposed to be the title bout in March, but Yakushi, well, he wanted one more contest before he fought Wayne. His people paid him $50,000 to step aside while he fought another voluntary defence of his title. Matt took his 25% managerial cut, and the rest was pocketed by the Pocket Rocket. 4 months before the fight, Wayne took on another stay-busy fight in New Orleans, Louisiana, against another Mexican in Genomino Cardos. He was a decent enough fighter that lasted 7 rounds of a scheduled 10 before he refused to come out of his corner.
So the world title fight was now finally going to happen. First off, there was a purse bid on where the fight was going to be held. Matt put forward a figure of just over $1 million, but the Japanese team blew that offer out the window, offering $2 million, and decided to take the fight, obviously, to Japan. Eddie Futch staggered Wayne's training camp from Vegas to Utah to the sunshine of Hawaii for a week before heading to Nagoya, Japan, and he was ready and eager to succeed. The mind games began at the weigh-in when the champion got off the scales. He was actually overweight, and Wayne recalls that he went away and came back 20 minutes later. He didn't even go and sweat. It was all a big con. He comes back wearing a pair of Speedos, jumps on, he's underweight. By the time we got back on the scales, I was probably 8 stone 9. Financially, Wayne picked up his biggest paycheck to date, $500,000. The fight was held on a Sunday afternoon at the Anchi Prefectural Gym, and Eddie and Wayne, well, they had several different strategies that they had worked on in camp, but it wasn't until the day of the fight that Eddie disclosed the tactics he wanted, and this is what Wayne said. He said, he, as in Eddie, told me to go out there and use my jab and to double and triple it up. I'd worked on this in the gym, but I didn't know it was going to be the plan. Yakushi was a tall fighter with a good jab, so I doubted jabbing a jabber would actually work. But I thought I'd try it anyway. You've just been told by Eddie, give it a go. Into the fight, and from the first round, Wayne did exactly as he was instructed, and he doubled and he tripled up that jab. Eddie's blueprint was spot on, which must have given him the world of confidence. The pace of this fight, I mean, I watched this again the other night. The pace of this fight was absolutely relentless. It was non-stop from the get-go. Yakushi would start each round fast, and Wayne would finish the stronger. There really wasn't anything in the fight after about 7 rounds. And then the 8th was one of the best. Yakushi landed a flush right hand that Wayne acknowledged with a little nod. He then came booming back with a barrage of combinations to the head and the body. Instead of covering up, the home fighter came right back. And it was at this point that Wayne knew I was going 12 rounds.
Now, going into the last 4 championship rounds, Eddie's advice was that McCullough was ahead on the cards, but he needed to maintain the pace. With 2 rounds to go, Wayne was cut on his forehead and on the back of his head from a headbutt. Neither were bad enough to worry about, and Eddie's advice was now to box and move for the last 2 rounds, with the title in touching distance. That's exactly what Wayne McCullough did. At the sound of the final bell, the Irish sensation sunk to his knees with pure emotion. Wayne recalls this magic moment and said, "My entire team was confident of the victory, but we were anxiously awaiting the decision." The ring announcer read out the scores, but it was all in Japanese, so I couldn't understand what he was saying. I heard McCullough, then Yakushi, so I knew it was a split decision. The final score was read out and the announcer shouted, "McCullough had won the WBC Bantamweight Championship of the world."
Going to Japan was, even going there, I didn't know I was going to become the first British or Irish fighter to go there and win a championship. Nobody told me. But we had planned out, we had training camp here, went to Utah for training camp, and we stopped off in Hawaii for training camp, and then about a week in Japan. Everything was done right. Eddie planned it all perfectly. And Yakushiji was making his 5th defence of the World Championship in his home city, not just his home country. So the odds were stacked against us. But we went out there. Of course, we got 2 American judges and I think it was a Korean judge. And they gave me a split decision. But when you hear split decision, you're thinking, oh, here we go again, another bad decision. But they announced my name. That was like, "Go, yeah, Wayne McCullough." So that's all I heard. Didn't hear it and I knew what you would have liked to hear. I became world champion, and then right there your life changes forever. But the plan was done good. Eddie planned it perfectly and it worked. And I became the first Irish fighter to win the WBC belt, the first fighter in Britain to win a belt over there. And I'm still the only Irish man to win a WBC belt. Katie Taylor's since won the WBC belt for the women. It's a tough belt to win.
In less than 2.5 years since his pro debut, Wayne McCullough became the first Irishman to win a WBC belt and the first and the only British fighter to win a world title in Japan. That record of him being the only Irishman to win a WBC title actually still stands today. Katie Taylor is the only other fighter that has actually won a WBC title. Now, the fight was televised in the UK by Sky, and Ian Darke was one of their commentators. After the result had been announced, he told the viewers, "He's got justice. He's done it the hard way in the other fella's backyard." And that is one of the greatest performances by a British boxer. Wayne McCullough is the WBC Bantamweight champion, and how he deserved it. Of the $500,000, Wayne was left with $200,000 after the 25% that went to Matt and then the 15% to his trainers. He bought a yellow sports car and a house in Vegas. He was only 25 at the time. It didn't take long for Wayne to be back in the World Gym in Vegas with Eddie and Tell. Mike McCallum, Montel Griffin and Justin Duco were all training there as well. They now addressed him as champ. His first defence was set for December 2nd, 1995 at the King's Hall in Belfast against the undefeated Johnny Bridal, who was 26-0 from Denmark. The bout was part of a new 3-fight contract Wayne had signed with ITV. It was promoted by Aiken Promotions, International Events and Matchroom Boxing, who needed a picture for the fight poster. Because his WBC belt hadn't arrived, Mike McCallum actually lent his light heavyweight version of the WBC belt to Wayne for them pictures.
I think I see him saying how big it was. It must have been massive on him. So most of the preparations for this fight were completed in Vegas. But a week or so before, Wayne flew over to Belfast for press conferences and to acclimatise himself. Living in a hot country made Belfast feel even colder than normal. And he actually brought in a trainer called Kenny Crum, a former fighter of Eddie's, for the bout as well. The very first Belfast Telegraph Sports Awards actually took place on Fight Week, and Wayne McCullough scooped the Sports Personality of the Year award. When the fight finally arrived, the 7,000 in attendance were as noisy as ever. Jimmy Lennon Jr. was the announcer, and even Adrian Logan, commentating for ITV that evening, said, "Never have I witnessed a reception like this in the King's Hall for a boxer, and that really includes Barry McGuigan. This is very, very special for the Pocket Rocket." So pre-fight, Wayne wrote in his training diary, press conference, met Bridal, very cocky guy, smart remarks, will knock him out cold. It was the first time I hadn't liked an opponent. Well, if the referee hadn't allowed the fight to continue, he would have got his knockout wish. But in the end, the fight was stopped in the 8th. A good, impressive performance that from Wayne McCullough. Wayne's second defence was at the Point Theatre in Dublin against Jose Luis Bueno, who was a 28-6-1. And this was the first real time that Wayne struggled to make that 8 stone 6 pound limit or 118 pound limit. He was really dehydrated himself to the point that it became dangerous. And he actually recalled that I can usually bring my weight down to about 8 stone 7 pounds without a problem. But once I try to get below that, I have a really hard time. I start losing my vision and have no energy. The extra 16 pounds that he put on overnight did not help either. And he was actually bloated and he was actually really fatigued. Plenty of stars came out to watch this fight, which was live on ITV. Michael Flatley, Steve Collins, Bono, and Larry Mullen were all there. And Sean, I'll let you explain. The weight problems were really significant.
The fight itself, Wayne only recalls remembering 3 rounds. Then the next thing he remembers is waking up in the morning in bed. The loss of memory wasn't from a knockout blow or one punch from his opponent, but it was actually due to the problems he'd suffered making the weight. Somehow he actually went on to win the fight by a split decision, by fighting on pure instinct. But he did. He even managed to meet Bono after the fight and get his sunglasses. He had to be rushed to hospital after this fight, and Wayne said my blood pressure was out of control, and even though I was lying still on a hospital bed, my heart rate was over 100 beats per minute. My eardrum was burst. The doctor said I was in shock and had to inject me with morphine to ease the pain in my face. I was trembling. Just recently Kenny told me he thought I was going to die that night. He was sent home during the night, but when he woke, he knew he had got lucky. After that frightening experience, he decided to move up in weight to super-bantamweight. And his first fight was supposed to be on the Oscar de la Hoya Julio Cesar Chavez undercard. But due to his burst eardrum, he had to cancel. Now, Wayne's mental state started to decline also because he'd become discouraged by his training regime and lack of training, and he admitted I'd become very depressed about the training situation a few days before I was due to go to camp. I remember sitting at home one night and having suicidal thoughts. I've been told this is usually a cry for help. I sat in my living room and looked up at the open beam separating the 2 living areas. I visualised myself tying my strong leather jump rope around the beam, putting a noose on it, and hanging myself. He still believes that he would have gone through with it if it wasn't for Cheryl intervening that night, and she sensed something wasn't right, so he spoke to a doctor, and he received medication. Something that I never knew about Wayne. I'll be totally honest. I never knew that he really went through the ringer at this point in his career, and you wouldn't have known it from the outside in. You're looking from the outside as a fan, you would have absolutely no inclination that this was going on in his life, but he could have took his life that night, and by the sounds of it, very close to doing so if it wasn't for his wife Cheryl.
Yeah, it's again a good woman behind the man made a huge difference in his life, and wow, yeah, really quite sad, really. I mean, he put that in his book. When we hear these type of things, it's great to have idols like this coming out and speaking about this kind of thing because it brings it to light. And credit to him for being so brave to put that in. And well, back to the boxing, and his first opponent at the 122-pound division was actually supposed to be Duke McKenzie. But when Duke arrived in America, he was actually sent home due to paperwork issues. And with no recognised opponents to bring in short time notice, Wayne's purses actually, the fees for it dropped from $450,000 because it's supposed to be on ITV to $50,000 when he took on the tough Mexican Julio Cesar Cardona. He was actually drafted in short notice, and ITV then decided to pull the plug on the fight, which was scheduled to take place in Denver, Colorado. But it was actually still broadcast on CBS. I think it was on like an afternoon fight during the races, and Wayne said it actually done really well. It was a comfortable night's work for Wayne, and it was a decent fight in his new division, which he won by a unanimous decision. Prince Nazim Hamid was fighting in Dublin around this time, and it was reported that he told a newspaper that Cheryl feared Wayne fighting him. Now, he couldn't let this blow over. So what did he do? He flew over to Ireland and he actually approached Nazim Hamid in his weigh-in. And he recalls walking up to him and shaking his hand. And this is in Wayne's words. He said, he was surrounded by his entourage and Frank Warren. Don't dare say anything about my wife or my family ever again, I said to him. He asked me what I was talking about, but I told him he knew what I meant. We almost got into a scuffle, but Mick Devine pulled me away. Well, whether Hamid said it or not, it is either near or there, really. We don't quite know. But what we do know is he put up posters around Dublin that read, "Forget about McCullough, come see the Prince." Wayne went to the Hamid fight against Medina. And the media obviously began to hype a potential fight down the line. For now, Wayne had other business to contend to. He was the WBC super-bantamweight #1 contender. And it was the 39-year-old Daniel Zaragoza, absolute legend of Mexico, 57-7-3, a 3-time world champion in 2 different weight classes, who held that WBC title. The fight was scheduled on January 12, 1997, in the Heinz Convention Center in Boston, Massachusetts, which is scheduled to be live on HBO. Both fighters collected $500,000 for the fight in one of the biggest combined totals in the history of the division.
One of the greatest fights in the division as well.
Absolutely great fight. Sorry, I just had to interrupt you there, Sean, but before you move on, a belter. If you haven't seen it, please go and watch this one.
Now, the plan Wayne and Eddie established was to box on the outside. That plan was implemented throughout the fight, and Wayne believes he was in complete control. He even broke his jaw in round 2, yet still managed to fight on for another 10 rounds. It was an excellent fight that Wayne lost via a split decision, and it was voted the WBC Fight of the Year. But he felt robbed. He really came on strong in those last couple of rounds, and that's where we think he actually nicked it, and should have gone on to become a 2-weight world champion. By now, Wayne and Matt Tinley were still good friends, but their business relationship began to dwindle when he became a boxing promoter. Wayne signed a contract that he felt wasn't in his best interests for his new company, America Presents, so he requested that an attorney, Stuart Campbell, look at it. They had met through a friend, Johnny Tapia, and Stuart renegotiated a new contract with America Presents, and both parties were happy. Matt was now Wayne's promoter, Cheryl was his manager, and Stuart became his co-manager. There was also a change in his trainers. Eddie and Thel, well, they went their separate ways, but Wayne stayed with Thel for a while longer. Once the contract was signed, a fight was scheduled for April 17, 1998 at the Monahan Sun in Uncasville, Connecticut against Antonio Oscar Salas. But before the fight, Wayne and Cheryl had a baby daughter on March the 30th, 1998, Winona Lee Davis. Wayne defeated Oscar Salas by unanimous decision, but he struggled in his next fight against the former world super flyweight champion Juan Polo Perez from Colombia. Wayne wasn't on the fight mentality due to a disagreement with Matt about the finances, so his preparations probably weren't the best. Even with that, he still managed to get the win by split decision in Texas. The one great story that did come out of this fight was how Wayne had to call upon Cheryl to work him on the pads because Tell arrived late, and he said, "She came to my dressing room in a sparkly dress and shoes. Of course, USA Network, who were televising the fight, thought this was fun and filmed it, and it went out live all over America."
I'll tell you what, in the social media age today, could you imagine? That'd be everywhere, wouldn't it?
Yep.
Oh my God. Absolute class, that Cheryl, to come out there. I think he asked someone else, but he didn't want to get some bits on like some sweat and stuff on the guy's suit, so he brought in Cheryl to come and do it. Great stuff. Great story, that. And a great fight with Zaragoza. This less than impressive performance was the perfect shot window for a certain Prince Nazim Hamid. His team contacted Cheryl, and she agreed to the fight before even asking Wayne. I think she knew her man very well. This was the perfect fight for him. This was the motivation that he needed to fall back in love with boxing again. He called in Kenny Kroom to help him train for the Hamid fight after parting ways with Tell. He had been working over the summer with Cheryl on the pads as well. And Wayne was very complimentary of his wife's pad work. He said Cheryl was excellent on the pads and one of the best I've ever worked with. But she'll tell you herself she isn't a boxing trainer. They decided to train at Sugar Ray Leonard's Nevada Partners boxing gym, which was run by referee Richard Steele. He brought a few sparring partners, and one of them is very well known, a former world featherweight champion, Kevin Flushing Flash Kelly. And we all know about that. We've done a legendary night on Kelly and Nazim Hamed. Wayne and Kenny decided to seek some advice from their old manager, Eddie Futch. And this is what Eddie said. He said, keep Hamed moving to the left and not to let him land the big right hook. He said, if I was able to do this, Hamed would look like an ordinary fighter. Wise words, and he come very true, to be fair. In all the press conferences and interviews, Hamed was always hyping the fight and trying to get under Wayne's skin and in his head, but none of it worked. He's being very cocky, and a few times Wayne wanted to just switch on the man for little champion, but he didn't. And, Nazim at the time, he had knocked out 18 opponents straight before Wayne McCullough and was 30-0 at the time with 28 KOs to his credit. But Wayne kept his composure, refused to chime in on that trash talk. Everyone thought Hamed would win by knockout, but few did refuse to join that hype train. One in particular was Larry Hazard of the New Jersey Boxing Commission. And he in an interview, he said, if anybody thinks the Prince is in for an easy night, they better think again. Clearly knows his boxing, Larry, and the fight was predictably billed as Fright Night, as it was on Halloween, October 31st, 1998, and it took place at the Broadwalk Hall in Atlantic City, New Jersey.
Now, before I move in and discuss this fight in a bit more detail, I just want to say this has got one of the best entrances of a fighter that I've ever seen. I mean, credit to Nazim Hamed. They come up with some absolutely brilliant entrances for him. This one was brilliant when he came into Thriller. It was excellent. To all his credit, it was excellent. But he didn't know when he was walking into that ring. He didn't know that he was going in there with a guy who was going to give him probably, arguably, the toughest fight of his boxing career. Now, we've seen Hamed. We talked about Hamed a lot, and we knew going into this fight, and I recall it very fondly from the time, and everybody thought Hamed was going to go in and knock him out because he was on this run. He was very brash, very confident, and Wayne McCullough weren't having any of it. Now, as expected, Hamed looked for the knockout in the first 3 rounds, but Wayne stood strong and used all his experience to get through them rounds. But when he landed the punch that made Hamed touch the canvas with his glove, that's when the fight changed. It was not actually acknowledged as a knockdown. To be fair, it was probably the correct decision, but the irony was that the exact moment Hamed said he would knock out McCullough, interesting that happened at that moment. The rest of the fight was Wayne chasing down Hamed, who moved away and landed the odd pot shots. I think Wayne proved everybody wrong that night, and he went the distance. But I think he deserved a lot more than what the scores suggested. It was 116-112, 117-111, and 118-110. I think that was very harsh on Wayne McCullough. In fact, I think it was a lot closer than that. I mean, he never came anywhere near to stopping Wayne McCullough, Nazim Hamed. He might have shown that he had, an extra bit of power, but I think McCullough just shown how strong he was in that fight, and I think he deserved a second fight there. But it never happened.
Yeah, the Hamed fight, we went back to 93 actually. He fought in my undercard in Dublin. So, got back into 96, and he fought in Dublin against Milo Medina, defended the World Championship, and he had posters around the city, forget about McCullough comes to the Prince, and I was here, and I said to my wife, I'm jumping on a flight, we're going over there. I jumped on a flight, met up with Mick Devine over there, went to the Guinness factory where the weigh-in was taking place, and confronted him, and more or less said to him, don't say anything about, I think he said, you were scared of me fighting him, whatever. And I said, don't mention anything about my family. You can say whatever you want about me, but you cross the line. He had about 30 people around him. And I poked him in the chest, I think. There was somebody standing on the balcony. He said, don't touch me. I said, I'll knock you over the balcony. Then Mick Devine pulled me off, and then I went to the fight the next day. Frank Warren graciously gave me tickets, but they were at the back. And then when people got to see me there, then Sky TV spotted me. They brought me right up, and I sat right behind Hamed's father. And that whole night, the crowd sang "We McCullough" the whole night. And Hamed looked terrible that night. He won the fight, but he looked terrible. And I thought, he's never going to fight me. But then, 98, I was out of the ring for like 15 months or more. I had 2 quick fights back. One was against Juan Polo Perez, former world champion, that Hamed had knocked out in maybe 1 or 2 rounds over there. But I was going through promoter problems, and I looked like garbage. We've done Corpus Christi, Texas. And I won the fight easy enough, but they gave me a split decision, of course. And I got the call Monday. My wife came in, I was in bed, I think, and she said, "Do you want the Hamed fight?" I'm like, "Yep." Didn't even know how much I was getting. Just said yes to it because I want the fight so badly. But I really hadn't fought a featherweight. I was fought like 8 stone, 12, 13, 124, 125, whatever. But I haven't really fought full-blown featherweight. But I wanted the fight so bad. Hamed probably thought I was done because I looked like garbage in that fight. And then we did the press conference. Then the fight happened. Of course, everybody knows what happened in the fight. Tried to knock me out in the first round. He had 18 knockouts in a row going into it at the level. And I just said to him in the press conference, "As soon as you hit me in the chin, you're going to run." And he was convinced he was going to knock me out at such and such a round and what time. But as soon as he hit me, I shrugged my shoulders at him, as it says at it. And for 12 rounds he runs, holds me, pushes me down. The referee, Joe Cortez, was horrible that night. He didn't even warn him once for me putting me down, which he got disqualified. Put me down the second round, hit me on the canvas. The referee did nothing. I had whiplash in my neck. And then the announced his decision, he got booed. But as I say, the fight I wanted, Frank Warren, I have him on video. He didn't give me a rematch, but he left Frank Warren. Brendan Ingle, his coach, he left him after that fight. And then we should have fought again, but he never wanted it the first time. But say, took him a distance. You know, commentators trying to say it's a moral victory. It wasn't a moral victory. He ran. I won the fight, and he ran away.
What do you think about that? Just thinking back on your memories of that fight now, and in hindsight of how that fight went, do you think it was one of Hamed's toughest, if not his toughest fight? And again, do you agree that it should have been given more on the scorecards? I mean, I think Wayne feels himself, he probably should have won that fight.
Yeah, I mean, I did watch it back. I feel that Naz won those first sort of 3 rounds, and then I think Wayne pressed the fight. I think Naz did run pretty much after that. He realised he ain't going to get rid of him, and it did expose him. It really did. I believe that for Naz, he realised, actually, I'm not that strong. And I think the biggest question was, how chinny was Naz, really? I mean, everyone's thinking he's going to knock McCullough out. McCullough never even hit the canvas, you know, and Naz had, especially with the Kevin Kelly fight. So I think Naz realised his chin was weaker than McCullough's, and then he thought his power was going to get rid of him, realised he couldn't, and he sort of backtracked and he was looking for the pot shots. I could understand why Wayne would feel that he won the fight. He was the aggressor, and Naz dropped off looking for the pot shots. It depends what you like, isn't it, really? But it was a lot closer, a hell of a lot closer than them scorecards suggested. Dreadful scoring for me. I mean, it was absolutely one-sided completely, and it was nowhere near that. He should have been given a rematch, 100%. And I think Frank Warren would have given him the rematch because Frank Warren was in Naz's promoter, but Naz left him. And I think that's probably part of the reason why he left him, because Frank probably would have given Wayne the rematch. And Naz weren't interested in that because he realised he's going to be in for another hard night. And the one thing I will say as well is that it would have helped Naz if he had have got the rematch with Wayne, and it would have prepared him better for when he went on to fight Pereira for me. And I think Wayne was the perfect fighter. And I think Wayne learned a lot, and he would have been more of the aggressor in the fight because he realised, although he knew he hit hard, he had his number. So for me, I think Naz won the fight. I think it's very close though, but I can understand why Wayne would think that he won it. A rematch should have happened.
Well, KO magazine, they embezzled the words "exposed" across its cover with a picture of Hamed and Wayne. Sour grapes came in the form of ex-trainer Tell when he put in a lawsuit against Wayne because he'd used Kenny instead of him, but that was settled rather quickly. Wayne's performance against Hamed, was that good that it helped him get another world title shot when America Presents secured him a fight with the now legend Eric Morales for the WBC Super Bantamweight Championship on May the 8th, 1999. But due to a spider bite on his hand and a serious back injury sustained in training for the fight, it was actually postponed to October the 22nd, 1999, and actually put on the undercard of Nazim Hamed versus Cesar Soto at the Joe Louis Arena in Detroit, Michigan. Once his injuries had subsided, he decided to take a warm-up fight to get him prepared. He fought Len Martinez 17-5-1 and won a unanimous decision in Las Vegas.
Then Peter Parker, after his spider bite, was ready to fight Eric Morales. The undefeated Eric Morales, 34-0, 28 KOs. Arguably for me, his best fight, his best name on his resume. And oh my goodness, he was on a knockout streak as well of 9. The fight itself is another absolute belt and another contender for the fight of the year. It was also one of Wayne's finest performances. Zaragoza for me was his best, but one of his second was this performance, and he lost by unanimous decision. Again, the scorecards so harsh on Wayne. 2 judges scored it 1-1-16, 1-1-12 on the third, 1-1-8, 1-1-10. No way. It was a lot closer than that. But he came up against a genuine article in Eric Morales, and Wayne admitted that he was by far the hardest punch I'd ever faced him up in a professional boxing ring. Morales actually told Ring Magazine that McCullough gave him one of the top 3 fights of his career, and he almost quit on his stall after the 9th round. Again, wow. I'll ask you, Sean. I mean, what a great fight that was, and could you recall that fight? And I don't know, what do you think of Wayne's performance that night? I thought that was better than the Naz performance, but what a fight just in general.
It just goes to show you that he was top tier, that he was the best of the best. He was around the best of the best as well. And I think that performance against Morales is one that it got better with age. You look back at it now, and we did do that in preparation for this episode on Wayne's life and career. And looking back on it now, I give him even more credit. You know, watching it at the time, sometimes you're quite sort of blinded in the moment, but then looking back on it now, I was able to watch it a lot more objectively, and obviously with the benefit of hindsight, I look back on it and I think that was one of Wayne's greatest performances against one of the greatest fighters that ever graced the squared circle. So not only has he faced Daniel Zaragoza at this point, he's faced Prince Nazim Hamed, he's faced Eric Morales. You know, he's facing all these great fighters of his time. So you can't say that he never got in the ring and shied away from a fight or ducked anybody in his career. But that fight in particular was one of his great performances. And it sounds mad, doesn't it? You say it's one of his greatest performances, but he lost. You know, any other night, he could have potentially been given a nod. You just don't know. Boxing is boxing. Boxing can come up with some of the most ridiculous scorecards and the most ridiculous judging that you've ever seen. And on that night, I think it was a bit harsh on him on the judges' scorecard, but I do think that Eric Morales was just a little bit better than Wayne and proved that he was an elite level fighter, a legend of the sport in the making. There's no shame in Wayne losing that fight on the cards to Eric Morales, but it's good that he had that particular battle with him, because that just goes to show you the level that Wayne McCullough was at. And
I agree with you completely. And I think the fact is that the Daniel Zaragoza fight, which I still think, I mean, I watched that the other night, and I don't know how he lost that fight. I think he won that fight. I think the Morales fight was actually closer than the Hamed fight, although I'm not quite sure of what Wayne believes. But again, I mean, that was just a great fight. I mean, it really was. He gave him hell that night, Morales. But anyway, October 2000, McCullough was to return to his native Belfast for the homecoming fight. 2 days before the fight was scheduled to take place, he was told that he had a cyst on his brain and he couldn't fight again, and that one more blow to the head could kill him. They got a second opinion, and they were told that the cyst was in a space between the brain and the skull. So the cyst wasn't actually on the brain. They then met with Dr. Martin in LA, and Wayne recalls that the first thing I asked was whether I could die from a blow to the head. And he laughed, but not in a bad way. Whoever told you that was way off. So that would have been good news for him for a start. Dr. Martin took over the case and then issued a thorough report stating that he had consulted with 3 microsurgical colleagues highly experienced with traumatic brain injury and sports-related microsurgical issues, and that he saw no reason for him to give up his boxing career. It came back to England, and Dr. Richards from Oxford actually backed up that report. And part of his report, these are parts of their reports and brief summarizations, but Wayne McCullough was not at any greater risk of any intracranial hemorrhage than any other boxer, and would have no concerns about allowing him to continue his boxing career.
However, the British Boxing Board of Control continued to deny him a licence. Wayne decided to try and fight in the States after getting his mental well-being right. He used hypnosis and it worked for him. It was, after all, such a terrifying ordeal, and he recalls, "I applied for my Nevada boxing licence, and after undergoing all the necessary tests, was given a clean bill of health and a licence." His comeback fight was against Alvin Brown, and he stopped him in 2 rounds. Wayne was back, and he said, "When I stepped through the ropes for the first time in 27 months, I felt peaceful and at home. I put all the anxiety behind me. I was looking ahead to competing in bigger fights." Now, Matt Tinley and Wayne parted ways after the Brown fight, and Wayne said, "Matt was a big part of my life at the beginning of my career. The last time I saw him was in 2004 when he drove to Vegas with his kids for spring break. We hadn't spoken in over a year before that. I had wanted to stay in touch, but he changed his numbers and moved house." Wayne then began working with the Sports Network, now that he was licensed to fight in Britain. They worked out a good deal, and he signed a 2-year contract in April of 2002. After a very public battle ensued between Wayne McCullough and the British Boxing Board of Control, who could no longer deny him his licence, the public battle led to the British Boxing Board of Control Dr. George O'Neill quitting, following the decision to give Wayne his licence to box in Britain. His decision was followed by the resignations of 3 other doctors who are connected to the Northern Ireland Area Council for the board. O'Neill told the BBC, "I feel that, ethically and morally, I can no longer be part of boxing. I will not discuss individual cases, but my views are quite clear." Cheryl had to come out publicly as well, and this is what she said. "The press are assuming that George O'Neill has resigned over Wayne, and if that is the case, then he should come out and say so. I have had no correspondence with George since about October 2000. Everything was on his desk the Wednesday before Wayne was granted his licence, so he should have aired any opinion he had on the matter rather than waiting until now and casting a shadow over this fantastic time in Wayne's career."
And she was right. I mean, they didn't name him as such, and why they resigned, etc. And I think that's part of it. That wasn't right of them to be able to be doing that. And the fact is by all accounts, it would generally seem that cyst that was on Wayne's brain, I mean, they can't be 100% sure, but it looks like it was literally from when he was a little child, before, when he started boxing. So, it wasn't something he had developed because of fighting, and there was no way he was in any danger of dying in a ring if he took another blow to the head. That was all just a load of old nonsense, really, from what we believe now. Well, Wayne was thankful, and he thanked Simon Block and Robert Smith, worked on his case for over 2 years, and he said, "Without their help, I would have never have received my licence. I know they didn't make the medical decision in the beginning. I have no hard feelings towards the British Boxing Board of Control, having missed out on work, even though I was in the prime of my career." And that is the biggest part of it, is Wayne would have still had some big fights there, some title fights in the horizon. Well, Wayne was able to step back in the British ring, and he done so under Frank Warren. His first fight with him was scheduled for September 14, 2002 in Bethnal Green's York Hall against South African Jonas Misa, and the fight was shown live on Sky Sports as well. It was a nice return, nice fight for him to come back to. He stopped him in 4 rounds. His next fight was his last ever in Belfast against Russian Nikolai Emerev on November 2nd, 2002, and Wayne produced a great display in front of his adoring fans at the Maysfield Leisure Centre. The fight was actually stopped 2 minutes 55 of round number 4. He recalled that the fans loved my performance and I got another standing ovation. I loved the support from my fans this time. My homecoming was complete. Frank Warren promised Wayne a world title shot, and that's exactly what he got him. A shot at the WBO featherweight title against the champion Scott Harrison, 18-1-1 from Scotland. The fight took place in Glasgow on March 22nd, 2003. Preparations did not go well. Cheryl wanted to pull the plug on the fight against Scott Harrison because Wayne's shoulders and back were getting worse, but he overruled her and he said, looking back, I know she was right. I should have withdrawn from the fight and I paid the price. Johnny and Teresa Tapia sat ringside next to Cheryl for the fight just to give him some morale, just to edge him on. While Wayne would basically struggle there against Harrison. He admitted so. He said, I'd been in a ring with Morales and Hamid, but Harrison was far stronger and larger than any other opponent or any other fighter I'd ever fought.
And obviously you've got to take into consideration the injuries that he's obviously suffering with and the fact that, you know, this happens to, I think every fighter has this throughout the career. They won't always admit it. Sometimes they come out after the career is done and really look back on times where maybe they shouldn't have gone into a fight. And this was one of them occasions where he probably shouldn't have gone into the fight against Scott Harrison, because at this time, Scott Harrison was probably at the best that Scott Harrison was at. You know, he was fantastic at this time, Scott Harrison. So Wayne was going there against another world champion, another legit guy in the division. And it obviously was a decision that, obviously looking back now, he regrets. But at the end of the day, it was one of them things that he felt was the right thing to do at the time. Harrison, of course, won that fight conclusively. And Wayne, well, he was in bad shape after the fight. He was completely dehydrated, and he said, an ambulance arrived and the paramedics put me on a stretcher and the ringside physician was waiting for me in the ambulance. I felt as if I couldn't breathe. I was faint and I know I was drifting away. I looked at Cheryl, who was less than 3 feet behind me. I wanted to tell her I loved her, and I always would love her, but I couldn't get a breath. I thought it was the last time I was ever going to see her. There was a problem with his heart. He'd picked up a virus, most likely when he was in Vegas, and it actually attacked his heart. Thankfully, he did pull through, and was released from hospital 3 days later. Wayne, he parted ways with Frank Warren after he got him the fights he wanted, and then on August the 3rd, 2004, he signed with Dan Gooson's Tutor Boxing Promotions. Cheryl managed to get Freddie Roach in as Wayne's trainer, and they began working together at the Wildcard Boxing Gym in Hollywood, California. Their first fight was against Mike Juarez on September the 23rd, 2004, and Wayne won by a second-round stoppage. Dan Gooson then pulled some strings to get Wayne a shot at the WBC super-bantamweight champion Oscar Larios, who was 54-3-1, which was broadcast live on Fox TV, and the show was called The Best Damn Sports Show, period. The result of his first fight with Larios is widely disputed. It took place at the Palace Indian Gaming Center in Lemoore, California on February the 10th, 2005. McCullough dropped the featherweight for the first time in 5 years, but he lost by a unanimous decision to, again, horrendous scorecards of 118-109, 118-110 and 116-111. If social media was around today, this fight itself would have broken the internet. That old saying about breaking the internet, this is one of them fights that would have done it, especially how horrendous the scorecards was. Wayne admitted, I'd done enough to take the title, but if I'm being totally honest, I knew I wasn't going to get the decision. When the scores were read out, I just stood in disbelief. I walked straight over to Larios and shook his hand. I had no hard feelings. He didn't score the fight. I was obviously disappointed, but I wasn't about to complain or make excuses. I had nothing to be ashamed of.
He absolutely didn't have anything to be ashamed of. He won the fight. He was in complete control for the first half. He let Larios come back a little bit in the second half, but he did say himself that one of the rounds that it was a moment where he sat in a corner where he almost felt like walking out of the ring. It pretty much dominated for 6 rounds, and then he just collapsed in his mind. He couldn't quite put his finger on what was wrong with him. And I think it probably is just the age. It happens. Yeah, sometimes fighters lose it outside of the ring, and I think it's probably this Larios fight, halfway through it, where he's in control for me, and he loses. It's like his legs have gone. But then, saying that, he come back strong really late. I think that was the fight where eventually, I think that was where Wayne really did come down. So he could have been in and around those 2 years out of the ring. He could have really improved his record even more. But the second Larios fight was a different story from the first. And Wayne, he still showed those flashes of his old self, but the reflexes, movement, and speed, they just weren't what they used to be. The one quality that remained with Wayne was that warrior's heart and that spirit that drove him on. But by the midway point of this fight, similar, it had become really one-sided. It was actually reported that Richard Steele and Dr. Margaret Goodman actually called a halt to the bout after the 10th round, which took place at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas on July 16, 2005. But Wayne found out it wasn't the case 6 months later. And this is what he said. He said, it was him, Freddie Roach. I was disgusted. I contacted him about it. I knew the doctor and I respected her decision, but I found that Freddie had already told her to pull me out between the rounds. I never had a mark on me. I did mark up. I'm the type of guy who bruises up, but I don't cut. I had Oscar Larios cut over both his eyes, and in the last 2 rounds, anything could have happened, but I wasn't allowed to fight them. It was 2 rounds taken away from my life. Oh, it's a tough one. He did have him. Larios was winning the fight, but he was cut up. I still think Larios was winning the fight. It's a tough one. On August 17, 2005, Wayne was appointed the first WBC ambassador of peace and goodwill in sports. And the following month, he actually became a United States citizen as well. In November that same year, he released his autobiography, which was a huge source of our deep dive into the Wayne McCullough career profile. And we will mention it again because it's an excellent book and we highly recommend it. Even if you're not, if you're not a fan, you want to get to know Wayne McCullough, the Pocket Rocket, Don't Quit. He went on a publicity tour to promote the book. He actually reached to number 2 as the best sellers list as well. A really good book. I really, really do recommend it. We both do. And in 2007, Wayne actually joined the Ultimate Fighting Championship organization as a PR associate to promote mixed martial arts. A huge fan of MMA, UFC. He loves it. So, yeah, if you didn't know that, now you do.
Well, I hope that you've obviously enjoyed elements of Wayne speaking about his career in this episode, because they were sources that we got direct from Wayne. We asked Wayne a lot of questions prior to recording the episode, and he answered them very gracefully and provided us with a lot of other information aside from his book. But that book is brilliant. Obviously, it gives you a good insight into his life, which we hope we've covered in the course of this. But moving back to his career and just rounding up his boxing career, in 2007, Wayne signed to fight the Spaniard, Kiko Martinez, who had just defeated Bernard Dunn at the Point Depot in Dublin for the European super-bantamweight title, and their fight was due to take place at the Belfast King's Hall on December the 1st, 2007. And of course it sold out. It was agreed that the non-title fight would take place at 8 stone 12. However, on the day before the fight there was an uproar during the weigh-in, and the fight was cancelled by the British Boxing Border Control amid chaotic scenes. When McCullough had already contracted to fight at £2 over the 8 stone 10 pound championship weight, and he weighed in at 8 stone 9. However, Martinez failed to make the agreed weight and was 1 3/4 pounds overweight. Martinez was given a couple of hours to shed the excess weight, but he did not return to weigh in again, and the scales were closed by a British Boxing Border Control official. A furious McCullough stated, "I couldn't believe it. He comes in over the weight, and then after being asked to take it off, he just sits there and does nothing. I just can't believe what has happened. I was ready to fight and ready to win, and he comes in that much over the weight." Now on June the 20th, 2008, Wayne fought his last professional fight for the NABF featherweight title, which was vacant, against the American Juan Ruiz, who was 22-5, at the Royal Walter Cruise Terminal in Georgetown in the Cayman Islands. The 37-year-old Wayne McCullough was forced to retire in the 7th round, which ended an excellent career with a record of 27 wins, 18 knockouts and 7 losses. McCullough, as you rightly pointed out, Johnston, earlier, was actually never knocked down throughout his whole professional career. And just imagine if that fight with Kiko Martinez would have actually took place. What an absolute barn burner of a fight that would have been. Even an older version of Wayne McCullough would have given him an absolute barn burner of a fight. Would he have won it? I don't know. We're never going to know. But it would have been an excellent fight, and it's a shame that that fight wasn't allowed to happen. But Wayne finishes his career at 37 years of age with an absolutely brilliant record. He fought 11 either ex, current, or future world champions throughout his career. 11. And he was the first and still stands as the only male Irish fighter to win the WBC title. That is a feat that has still not been broken yet. And yet people don't talk about Wayne McCullough's career as well as what I think they should do.
Greatest moments in your career, amateur and pro, would probably be the Olympics. The Commonwealth Games was memorial, and I'll never forget it. But everybody talks about the Olympic medal, but I always say to people, I lost. But you always say, oh, you won an Olympic medal for Ireland, whatever. And back then it was our first silver medal in 36 years. So probably the people that got the Olympic medal is your biggest achievement in the amateurs, whatever colour it is. Professionally, of course, the WBC belt. You know, it's the belt I wanted to win since I was a kid. And I got it first time. You know, as I say before, I could have had more of them, but I didn't get them. And I think that's probably the highlight of my pro career, is winning the WBC Championship of the World. And, you know, I'm grateful for that. I think, you know, they're Hamed and Morales and Zaragoza, Yagashi, they're all like Hall of Famers and stuff. And say I fought 11 world champions out of 34 pro fights, which is almost a third of my fights against champions. So not a lot of people can say that. And I say I should have been a 3-weight world champion, but I didn't get the decisions in the other 2 weight classes. Could have had 4 belts total, but I got 1, so I can't be greedy. But I say there's a lot of people you meet along the way, and I say you meet the likes of Mike Tyson along the way, and he knows who you are and stuff, and so you're known when you make a mark in the boxing world. You're known everywhere, and it's a good thing. But I say boxers have a respect for each other, you know, and long friendships for the rest of your life. I think the best fighter of them all, it's debatable. You know, Hamed he's a Hall of Famer. I say Morales, Yagashiji, you know, Zaragoza, you know, Jose Luis Bueno. I fought 11 world champions out of 34 pro fights. And the toughest one was Victor Rabinales, who's a former world champion. I beat the elimination fight. He's the only guy that hurt me. But I think Morales, pound for pound. Hamed's up there, of course. People, you know, Hamed hit hard. Morales is a harder hitter. But he's a legend. He went on to become multiple world champion, different weight classes. And Hamed, I say he was a featherweight his whole career and ended his career after Burra beat him. But probably have to rate Morales up there as the top guy, for sure.
I think he's had an excellent career, and look what he's doing now. You know, over in America, he's been over there for a very long time, and you know, he says himself what he told us, and what you've probably heard now is, you know, he's training fighters, he's involved in boxing, he's involved in training MMA fighters. He's got a great life over in America for him now. He's really set himself up for good, and it's great to see that happen off the back of a boxing career, because the amount of times we cover different lives and different times of different fighters who end up, you know, potless, broke, with nothing, and die alone, it happens more often than not. But Wayne McCullough is a perfect example of a guy that's an absolute warrior, that's given so much to boxing and not let boxing take too much from him in the process as well.
Oh, I completely agree. And Wayne McCullough does get overlooked. He's one of the greatest Irish fighters that have ever lived. He's one of the best. As I say, I have him top 50, top 40, best British fighters ever. You know, that's a stacked list of some of the greatest fighters through all the years. You know, we like to go way back. We don't just go out to the 50s, Sean. We go way, way back, don't we, mate? We love all that. And Wayne, you know, I mean, with every good man, every strong man, what's that saying? There's always a strong woman behind them. And you got to give a lot of credit to Cheryl as well. The way she was a nurse as well, young girl, a nurse, I believe. And she packed up her job and went with Wayne to Vegas, and she stuck by her man all the way through. Huge credit to her as well. And it just shows you that young love can survive. And they were just, you know, just reading that story. I mean, I'm not a professional boxer, but you know, I can relate with myself. I was with my childhood sweetheart and we're still together now. So I get that with Wayne and Cheryl. So, But as a fighter, tremendous fighter. For me, Zaragoza's his best performance. Got robbed. Should have been a 2-weight world champion. So many of his fights where he should have got the nod. You know, Zaragoza, Morales is a very contentious one. I'd urge anyone to go back and watch Wayne McCullough against Eric Morales and tell me whether you think you've got it now. Dan Morales won that fight. I'm telling you, you might need to watch it again to come to that decision because it's a tough one. It really is. I think Naz edges the fight for me. But again, to be fair, I watched phase of that the other night because I've seen it. I watched it. We lived through it, Sean. So I remember cheering on Wayne. I was never a Naz fan at the time. I appreciate what he'd done now, but I always I'd have cheered on anyone that fought Naz, but definitely Wayne. And the trouble is, I mean, the other thing is my family, my dad's side, they're all Northern Ireland, and you know, they're Northern Irish, and my uncle sort of was a policeman through it all. So to hear some of the stories that he had as a youngster growing up, it sort of rings true for me as well. So he's just a genuinely nice guy as well, Wayne. See, it's easy to like him. It's easy to, you know, he's very appreciative of his fans, and he reaches out to you like we've seen in his career profile. And we wanted to make sure we're doing credit. And an absolute legend, it really is, and a British legend. And it's great that we could do these kind of things because for anyone that didn't know Wayne, you just knew him as an opponent to Naz. But I'm hoping now, when you see his resume, I think it was better than Naz's. So, I mean, that says a lot about Wayne.
To be with Eddie Fudge was just like a dream because I looked up to him as a fighter. Back in the day, you had to read magazines and maybe get one fight on TV once a month or something. But I knew who Eddie Fudge was, of course. And there was Fraser, Norton, Spinks, 3 guys beat Muhammad Ali. And then Ali beat them, of course. But when I came here, Riddick Bowe was the heavyweight champion of the world. Michael Collins was in camp. And he decided to take me on. And 82 years old. And he seen something in me and it made me into a world champion after 2 years and 5 months or something. So without him, I wouldn't have won the belt. People say, oh, you had talent, but you could have. I said, but you have to have talent brought out of you. And with him bringing it out of me, I became champion. So I'm always grateful for him. And I was close to him until he passed away. And I'm the only fighter he ever gave a signed letter to be a coach, and a pin from 1938, a Golden Gloves pin. And as I say, I was close to him till he passed away. And he looks over my gym every day with a picture on the wall. So I'll teach his methods as much as I can. Life after boxing for most fighters, it's tough. You know, how many former world champions get involved in boxing afterwards? They don't. Or even fighters, any just top level guys or even club level. They go away from it. There's a lot of people in boxing who've been around forever, promoters, managers. Some of the coaches, and most of the old coaches are gone. But, you know, you think about walking away from it, but then someone brings you back to it. Then you walk away again and someone brings you back to it. And I know I've got a lot of knowledge to teach people. And with Eddie's knowledge and, you know, my amateur level, Nicholas and my old coach Harry and stuff like that, you can bring something to the table for these younger generation. But life after boxing is tough. I say a lot of fighters have nothing, no money. So they have to get a job and have no experience to get a job. And then they're working for peanuts. And that's what happens. It happens in life, you know what I mean? And if I stay in boxing training people, then I'll be around it for forever, till the day I die.
Well, I've got a few accolades to go through, a few quotations of people that were around Wayne, that knew Wayne, and these are comments from them about what they've had to say over the years about his career. Now, the late great Eddie Futch told UTV, "In my years of boxing, I've worked with fellas like Joe Frazier, former world champion Ken Norton, Larry Holmes, Michael Spinks, Mike McCallum, Marlon Starling, Virgil Hill, Hedgeman Lewis. I've also had 19 world champions. Wayne rates up there with the top 5. The top 5. His other former trainer, Kenny Kroom, said the Pocket Rocket is from a rare breed of men, that small percentage who truly understand the benefit of sacrifice and hard work. He is a good friend and a great fighter." Barry McGuigan said Wayne McCullough is one of the greatest Irish fighters of all time. In my opinion, he's certainly the toughest. He has an outstanding chin, incredible stamina, and a heart like a lion. He's been involved in some of the best fights anywhere in the world over the last decade, and it has been my good fortune to have had the chance to comment on them. His bouts with Yakushi, Zaragoza, Hamed Morales and Larios were noted for their pace and ferocity, and one of hundreds of professional boxers who marvelled at his implacable attacking style. Wayne McCullough is a fighter's fighter.
Rounding off the accolades here, so Nicolas Cruz Hernandez, who was the Olympic boxing coach at the time, a Cuban that was working with the Irish boxing team, he said Wayne, without a shadow of a doubt, is the best Irish boxer of all time. His dedication, discipline, courage and willpower cannot be compared because they are his trademark. Nobody works as hard as he does. He's the best, the one and only. And you know, one thing, many would probably say this is on Wikipedia, but it's a great little line here. And it was during his bout against Eric Morales in 1999 that HBO commentator Larry Merchant joked, if you look in the dictionary under tough Irishman, you'll find a picture of Wayne McCullough. I think he's absolutely spot on, mate. He really was a cast iron chin, really solid as you like. People thought Naz was a big puncher. He took a lot of them blows. You know, he even says Naz weren't even his biggest puncher, so it says it all. Finishing quote from Wayne. This is what he said himself. I have been good for boxing, a role model for children, loyal, honest, clean living and true. True to myself, true to my wife, true to my family, and as I'm constantly reminded, true to my fans.
So final thoughts then on Wayne McCullough. You've mentioned it already. How good was he? You know, looking back on his career now, the level that he fought at, the fighters he was in the ring with, what they did and what they went on to do throughout their careers, I think puts it into perspective how good of a fighter he really was. You know, he was potentially, in some people's eyes, robbed of a couple of opportunities where he should have had world titles handed to him through the fights, but that didn't happen. But that just goes to show you that, you know, looking at the level he was in with, the way he bullied certain fighters around the ring, the way he was able to mix it with some of the best guys that were around, to me just screams an absolute legend of the sport. But a guy that probably gets overshadowed by the fighters that were around him during that era. You know, the Moraleses of the world, the Barreras of the world. You think of Naseem Hamed. You said Naseem Hamed doesn't have as good a resume as what Wayne McCullough has, and I totally agree with you on that. You think of Naseem Hamed and some of the fights he had in his career. If you're making these little comparisons right now, I'm telling you now, Wayne McCullough's resume is better than Naseem Hamed's. In terms of the depth, in terms of the amount of world champions he's fought, the level, the legendary status these guys went on to. I mean, Daniel Zaragoza, legend. Eric Morales, legend. You know, straight away, two huge names on his resume that have done so much for the sport. Naseem Hamed fought Barrera. Naseem Hamed lost the biggest fight of his career against Marco Antonio Barrera. Yeah, okay, he beat McCullough, and it was a close fight, but he lost his biggest fight of his career. For Wayne, he won the biggest fight of his career in a lot of regards, because he won that WBC world title against Yakushi over in Japan when nobody gave him a chance, really. Nobody expected him to go over and do a job. And that, for me, was the biggest win of his career. Everything else that came after it was a bonus. You know, sharing the ring with all these guys, going hell for leather with them all. To me, he's one of the greatest Irish fighters of all time, if not the greatest. Some people will have their own subjectiveness and arguments on that, but he's proved time and time again how good of a fighter he was throughout his career. So I'd rate him very highly. If you're looking at British and Irish rankings as a professional, where does he make it? He probably makes it into the top 20. I think top 20 is probably a good shout for Wayne McCullough. Top 10 is going to be really difficult. It's one of them where you'd really have to dissect everything and put parameters in place as to what you class as a top 10 or a top 20 fighter. But Wayne definitely sits up there in the top 20 for me, for what he's done throughout his career. But that's my opinion. People could argue that that is incorrect and that, you know, other people deserve to be way above him. But to be honest, Johnson, it's been a great experience to do Wayne's career, because, as you said, and as he said himself, he's very accommodating with his fans. And you guys have been listening for this episode for the last hour and 50 minutes, and you've heard snippets of Wayne talking about elements of his career. And all them are directly from Wayne himself, directly to us. We asked him a list of questions about his career, and he was very kind enough to share that information to us. And it was an absolute pleasure to have him tell us about these certain elements of his career in his own words, as well as the extracts from his book and the other sources that we were able to put together for it. So a big thank you goes to Wayne himself, really, for working with us and putting this together, because it's been an absolute pleasure. And I hope that we've done your career justice, Wayne. I hope that we've done the Irish boxing fans a bit of justice here with Wayne's career. I hope you guys that are listening, I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope that Seamus Laverty, I know you wanted this episode done. I hope you've enjoyed it, because, you know, when you put this to us, it was like, yeah, absolutely, we need to do a career profile on someone like Wayne, someone who in this day and age, this era of social media, you know, is not appreciated by the younger boxing fan that's just coming into the sport. He's only appreciated by the guys like me and you, Johnston, who have lived through it. The people that have lived through that era. It is, isn't it? It's crazy, isn't it? But just a final thought from you then, Johnston. How good was Wayne McCullough? How highly would you rate him?
I mean, I recently did do a British list, and Wayne sort of dropped. He was in about the top 30, 40 odd. Look, there's so many fighters. But, I mean, as an Irish, you think about the Irish legendary side of things. I mean, you've got Frampton, you've got McGuigan, and you've got Wayne McCullough. I think Wayne probably finishes above Barry. I think Barry sort of finishes third on that list because he finished early and he didn't quite get too many. I mean, he fought some legends of the sport, don't get me wrong. But I think when you look at it, I think Wayne fought the most. I mean, the one thing I would say is I'd challenge anybody to go onto YouTube and just watch those fights that Wayne lost, those title fights. Yeah, go and check out Yakayushi and he wins that fight. But go and look at the Naz fight. Sit down and watch it. Score it. Look at Zaragoza. Tell me he didn't win that fight, because he did. He should have been a 2-weight world champion. Look at the Morales fight and tell me 100% dead certain in my eye that Morales won that fight. Morales himself says he even considered retiring. That's how tough Wayne was. And then look at Galarius. If you can have a look at that fight and tell me again, I think the first fight he definitely wins. Oscar Larius may win the second, but the first fight, I think Wayne wins that. So the Harrison fight, I think, is the only really, and the Larius second fight, I think they're the two conclusive defeats. Ruiz, that one Ruiz, absolutely, you know, years ago, he was way beyond it. So that's probably his worst performance in his career. And that just says it all. At that age, that was his worst performance. Other than that, Larius, Zaragoza, Morales, Hamid. Look at them 4 fights and tell me that he lost them. 100% sure, all 4 of them fights. I don't think he did. He could potentially, if it had gone his way, he could have been a 3-time world champion, a 3-weight world champion, sorry. I mean, it was very possible. And I think there'd have been a lot of uproar about that. I think that's the one challenge I'd say to our listeners. Just go back, watch those fights in particular. And then I think from those fights, you will understand why we rate him so highly, because he was it was just a tremendous fighter, just overshadowed by the names you just mentioned there, the Barreras and Morales. And Naz got overshadowed by him, unfortunately, because there was a big hype train that surrounded him. But wow, what a fight, what an engine, what a chin, my goodness me. And an absolute pleasure. And thank you, Wayne. Huge respect to you for taking the time out and answering our questions. We can't thank you enough.
It's been an absolute pleasure. We really enjoyed putting this episode together. We hope that you've all enjoyed listening to it. And if you have, please go and let us know on social media at career_profiles on Twitter, or the BTR Boxing Pod Twitter account. You can find us on Facebook, BTR Boxing Podcast Network on Instagram and on YouTube. If you've not subbed to the channel, please go and sub to the channel. If you've not checked out the Patreon membership services, please do go and check that out. Anybody that is a patron already, we obviously always give our shout outs to them and the appreciations for them, but they get early access to episodes like this. They get access to content that is unreleased to the general public. Many great episodes that we put so much time into that you guys would absolutely love to listen to. So please go and check it out. Patreon.com/BTR Boxing Podcast Network. Go and check out what's available on there. And if you fancy it, please go and have a look, because the support is absolutely 100% appreciated by us. A big thank you again to Seamus Laverty, Wayne McCullough, for your input into this episode. We really appreciate it. We hope you've enjoyed this episode all about Pocket Rocket Wayne McCullough.